afternoon, everyone. Hi, I'm Kelly Gottschalk. I'm the Senior Director of Development here at VCU Libraries. I welcome you to the libraries for the 7th Artistic Mansions conversation with Charles and Louise Brownell. Before we get started today, a few housekeeping reminders. The water fountains and the restrooms are located to the right as you exit the lecture hall, just past the elevators on the right. As you leave the lecture hall today, please remember that this is a quiet floor and keep your voices to a whisper. Lastly, out of respect to our speaker and your fellow audience members, please check to see that your cell phones are silenced for the presentation and for the question and answer session. I'm honored to have been invited today to introduce Charles and Louise. For those of you who I haven't yet had the pleasure to meet, I'm a double VCU arts grad, and I can tell you from personal experience that the beauty and the mystery of the architecture on West Franklin Street and the surrounding neighborhood captured my imagination as a youngster and certainly played a role in bringing me to VCU as a student in the 1980s. Charles was the first faculty member in art history that I met when I returned from my master's in the 1990s. I'm so proud that VCU Libraries has been able to lure Charles and Louise out of retirement for their annual program in our beautiful lecture hall. Now for the good part. VCU owns a group of historic buildings that the university bought long ago as cheap real estate. Imagine that. These very buildings which so captured my heart as a child. These buildings have turned out to be a nationally important open-air museum. Today's speaker, Charles Brownell, has helped us to see why these buildings matter, and gifts from him and his sister Louise Brownell have helped VCU Libraries build its holdings of rare documents to interpret the buildings. You can see a selection of these items at the table over there by the window. Crystal Carpenter had her special collections, and Ruth Cody, the university archivist, have displayed some of these rarities that pertain to today's presentation by Charles and Louise. Ruth is actually with the table today, and she is happy to answer any inquiries that you might have regarding the materials. In 2015, Charles retired after 30 years of teaching in Virginia at the University of Mary Washington, UVA, and VCU. Charles earned a master's at the Winterthur Museum and a doctorate at Columbia University. To name just one publication that has won national awards, Charles is co-author of the Virginia Museum book, The Making of Virginia Architecture, the only general history of its subject. But Charles is prouder of having shaped a series of brilliant students at VCU. His students' dissertations, theses, and other papers are mostly available here at VCU Libraries, many via our digital repository, Scholars Compass. In retirement, Charles collaborates on presentations with Louise, who served as the Maryland Historical Registrar during the period when Charles taught at VCU. Louise did her undergraduate and graduate work at the universities of Texas, Michigan, and Delaware. In 2020, Louise and Charles created a fund at the Cabell Library's Special Collections in memory of their mother, Bess T. Brownell, and they provided for this fund in their estate planning. On behalf of VCU Libraries, I thank them for this wonderful gift, for their many gifts of materials, and for today's program. And that's enough introduction. Let's hear about VCU's artistic mansions. Charles.
Thank you, Kelly. Louise and I are very glad to see the friendly faces in this room and to know there's a growing audience on Zoom. But let's go. We like to ask, what's it for? And how's it put together? What's this event for? It's to invite you to enjoy some historic houses at VCU by looking, and that takes us to our first thesis. VCU's Monroe Park campus is a unique, nationally important museum of architectural history. Like that. This museum urges us to think as a museum should. And now our second thesis. Just one of the merits of this group is as a display of historic ornament. We've often examined ornament in these lectures. In 2022, we looked at wood and tile. In 2023, we started a formal series on decoration with the orders of column or rational decoration. In 2024, we moved to fantasy and monsters or irrational decoration. 2025 follows naturally poetic subjects from literature and myth. And so to our third thesis, through the centuries, ornament has often had literary or mythological subject matter. And fourth thesis, this subject matter has often followed a principle of decorum, the idea that X is right and Y isn't. Sometimes this has been based on instinct. Sometimes this has been based on theory. Fifth and last, it enriches our enjoyment of such ornament to recognize the subject matter and the decorum. If you take away our theses and pleasure in what we show you, the lecture will have worked. That's what today's for. How's it put together? There's a preface, a body with an introduction, 1, 2, 3 houses, a closing, a break, discussion, and tips in places of the tours that we once did, tips so you can explore on your own. The houses are these. And first, McAdams House. Second, Millheiser House. They belong to the late Victorian freestyles that broke from the academic restraints of the preceding 4 centuries. The freestyles were part of something larger called the aesthetic movement. Our third case across the street shows the reaction against the freestyles. It's the Scott House. It belongs to academic eclecticism, or the manner of the École des Beaux-Arts. That is, it belongs to a renewal of academic learning. Where are we in our event? We're in the preface, which means you, Louise and me, it, and them. You, we trust. You got the handout. You just follow down the pages. They list the main ideas or theses and the main works we'll see. In the middle are illustrations. In the back are sources. That's you. Now, Louise and me. I worked for years on Virginia architecture and am co-author, as Kelly said, of the award-winning standard book on the screen. While I taught at VCU, Louise served as registrar at the Maryland Historical Society. VCU's houses long ago plunged us into studying what became a specialty of ours, the aesthetic movement, to which, as we said, the freestyle belonged. Now, our subject. In 1992, when I moved to VCU, I found that it had in the past bought whole streets of historic buildings. Some buildings appear in this classic guide, but just as thumbnails with no names or dates. Professor Harwood's interior design students had begun studying these buildings, but there was still much for my pupils to do. As your source list says, most Brownell student papers are in special collections here at Cabell Library. By degrees, VCU is putting them online. The most pertinent is this star turn by Carrie Culhane, who earned a master's here and has become a major preservationist in Manhattan. We announced that last year we announced that after patient effort, Carrie finished her doctorate at University College London, and we say bravo, Carrie. And another bravo for them. The Cabell staff has collaborated to make today happen. Them, right? Them. Kelly, who came up with the idea for our series, Crystal, and Ruth, who set up a table today to show you a few rarities from special collections, and Ryan, who controls the demons of electronic technology and keeps us all safe. We adore working with them. Now, two more thanks to two inspiring friends whom we owe more than tongue can tell. First, Chris Novelli. Without Chris's scholarship and Chris's photos, we couldn't do this series. And second, Ray Bonus, a cornucopia of information and pictures. Ray has also taught us to give lectures a mascot. This spring, we have 4. These little chubbies who will announce transitions to us. So, to quote chubby number 1, let's get out of the preface, into the body, and into the introduction, which means where and what we're talking about. Where? Well-to-do Richmonders at first lived downtown around the Capitol. By degrees, fashion moved out Franklin Street. We owe our knowledge of how this happened, most of all, to the late Tyler Potterfield. That's where. What means the styles? As far as we know, no other American university owns a group of historic buildings comparable to VCU's collection. One thing that makes our group stand out is how much interior ornament survives, and much of that ornament belongs to the aesthetic movement, hence the name of our lecture series. The aesthetic movement began in England in response to the ugliness in the modern world, and then flourished in the US. The movement rested on the belief that introducing the arts widely into the home would elevate the occupants spiritually. The Virginia Museum provides a lush example. This bedroom, created for a Richmonder who made good in Manhattan, Arabella Yarrington, later Arabella Huntington. The room has what was called art decoration, and each part was wrought on a millionaire's budget. The theme of the room is night giving way to dawn. We see poppies. Because of one species, the opium poppy, this flower has been connected with sleep for ages. But we knew about that connection. There's a sconce with blown glass bats, a symbol of night. And the ceiling is painted as a canopy where morning glories open in front of the dawn sky. The aesthetic movement brought an unprecedented interest in art to American life. As that interest developed, the direct sequels to the movement grew more disciplined and democratic. For instance, the house that Arabella and her second husband, Henry Huntington, built in California on the strength of the love of art that the aesthetic movement had taught her. The building is in the Beaux-Arts manner. The Huntingtons assembled great art collections from the decorative arts through paintings, and left these things to be a museum. The story of American art museums would be quite different without the aesthetic movement. But now a cherubic chub, number 2, says, on to our first house, built for George and Sally McAdams, who had ties to such families as the Scotts. McAdams was a clothier. You may recall his firm by its later name, Barry Burke. Mrs. McAdams was socially active. Their nephew was the writer James Branch Cabell. The aesthetic movement seems to have reached the McAdamses only in that they wanted a stylish house. Their architect was a founder of the architectural profession in Richmond, Albert L. West, with his son. And the style is restrained freestyle. That's enough for the facade. Let's see the front parlor and its art decoration. Traditionally, in stylish rooms, the chimney piece ruled. So we look at the McAdamses. The asymmetrical woodwork is a bold and rare freestyle design inspired by many cultures. It is, alas, poorly made. No doubt it's Richmond-made woodwork, which was nothing to write home about. Fine ornament tended to come from out of town, like these excellent art tiles made in Ohio. Our concern is something called an art fireplace lining made of cast iron. Firebacks were made for centuries to throw heat outward, in theory. Aesthetic movement firebacks were further meant to delight the eye and the spirit with the play of flames against beautiful surfaces. The aesthetic movement pushed for families to gather at the hearth. The McAdamses chose high art for this finely cast fireback. Its maker remains unknown. 30 years of research suggests that no Richmond foundries made firebacks. Crystal and Ruth have displayed at the back of the room some of the documents from Richmond foundries that we have bought for special collections. And here is a fraction of the collection. And a little different from what's at the back of the room. How's the McAdams fireback put together? It's a copy. Its source is the Danish sculptor Bertel Thorvaldsen, a star of the neoclassical movement of the early 19th century. In Rome in 1815, Thorvaldsen devised a pair of plaques, and this pair became the best loved work of art of the 19th century. They consist of this plaque, Night and Her Children, Sleep and Death, and this plaque, Day. Now, what's here? First, Day. This was an afterthought to night. We see Aurora, the goddess of dawn. She's a winged female scattering flowers and attended by the spirit of light with his torch. Quite lovely. But night is more important. The conception supposedly seized Thorvaldsen one sleepless night, and the next day he threw himself into modeling the piece. We'll glance at the maze of classical myth later. A great help is this book. But Thorvaldsen wasn't working from some text. His plaque is a personal distillation. An owl tells us the time of day. The goddess is a winged female who wears a wreath of poppy buds, those symbols of sleep. She carries twin sleeping infants, sleep and death. The idea that sleep and death are the children of night can be traced as far back as about 700 BC to the poet Hesiod, one of the definers of Greek myth. Hesiod's version is different, though, and we know that Thorvaldsen didn't create his plaque by looking in books. The idea that sleep and death are twins is at least as old. It shows up at about the same date as Hesiod with the poet Homer, that other definer of Greek myth. The likeness between sleep and death seems obvious. It may have figured in literature long before Homer, and it has surely persisted. We're facing a great neoclassical transformation of imagery from a grisly portrayal of death to a serene one. Hugh Honor called our attention to this change in the 1960s. We can see the before and after at St. Peter's in Rome. For before, here's the tomb of Pope Alexander VII by the Baroque Titan Bernini. Death is a skeleton. Horrifyingly, it climbs up to get the Pope. Compare this with the work a century later, not by Thorvaldsen, but by Canova, the other superstar of neoclassical sculpture. And we go to the tomb of, whoops, a little too fast, the tomb of Clement XIII, where death, an ideal bringer of peace, has just turned the torch of life upside down to quench it. As an aside, like Thorvaldsen, Canova has had Richmond admirers, notably the Dooleys at Maymont. There are several Canova copies there, and you'll find Clement's Morning Lions duplicated at the enchanting Maymont Grotto. And there's one of Maymont's Leos. You'll also find inverted torches on neoclassical tombstones in quite a few cemeteries. But back to Thorvaldsen. What was his composition for? He didn't probe those two great questions. What is sleep? What is death? His plaque was meant to fulfill the neoclassical search for ideal beauty. It was meant to give delight, a basic historical goal of the arts. It doesn't reach the highest level of art. In the end, it's sentimental and decorative. Day and Night were the best loved work of art of their century. Thousands of copies showed up from mansions abroad to American quack medicine advertising. Just two local cases. There's the Richmond marble worker, J.W. Davies. He is one of the American stonecutters who adapted Night for children's tombstones, as you can see in Hollywood Cemetery. And two more. And then there's fire fronts or summer pieces, the metal inserts that blocked the hearth during warm summer months to keep filth from blowing out into a room. Some Richmond houses still have these. A major source of these was Peerless in Louisville, which made at least 4 versions of Day. The catalog screen belongs to, the catalog on the screen belongs to Craig Reynolds, Ph.D., VCU, whose VCU MA thesis on Louisville foundries is essential to understanding metalwork used in Richmond. And we might add that in August, Dr. Reynolds assumes the title of full professor and chair of art history at Northern Virginia Community College. But back to our focus, McAdams House and the issue of decorum. What's proper to put where? There have been many names for this idea. We'll stick with decorum. The McAdams has used the idea simply downstairs. For formal rooms, they picked firebacks that were high art. For more private rooms, their firebacks were playful. The aesthetic movement is the first period in the US when humor often played a part in decor. As we saw last year, for the family sitting room, the McAdamses picked a goofy demon. You just have to grin at this thing. McAdams House shows us another kind of decorum also. The idea that you should ornament a thing with motifs that express what that thing is. The notion occurs in the oldest Western theory book on design, written by Vitruvius in the 1st century BC, and the idea has had a huge history, including McAdams House. 2 upstairs rooms have kept their crisply cast iron surrounds. These are rare, but there are perhaps 5 more on their original hearths in VCU houses with charming overkill. This fireplace has 3 different fire motifs, all elegantly stylized. Bonfires, torches, a favorite motif for hearths, and a vibrant sunburst. Really nice. The fine stylization points to the impact of an artist named Vedder, and that's a natural segue to our second house, that of Gustavus Millheiser. He belonged to an eminent merchant family. My student Gordon Poindexter did a series of studies of Millheiser and his house that remain indispensable. We know that Millheiser was a cultivated man, and he built so extreme a showplace that it still shocks some people. His architect, William Poindexter of Richmond and Washington, designed a string of mansions on West Franklin and was at times a wild practitioner of the free style. People talk endless nonsense about this house. Chris Novelli long ago put his finger on the truth. The facade is a freestyle work close to its British origins. There's a book by a British master of the freestyle that I bet Poindexter owned. It's J.J. Stevenson's superb work, House Architecture, which is on display in this room. Stevenson recommended feature after feature that shows up at Millheiser House. Boldly asymmetrical facades, as per Millheiser, or in the body of the book, Dutch gables and German corner window turrets. But let's go in to the study, to the hearth. Its fireback is the sun god, signed by an aesthetic movement great, Elihu Vedder. Vedder was a visionary who spent most of his career in Italy, but tackled the applied arts on trips home. He created a peak of the aesthetic movement. With this landmark in the rise of book arts, this glorious edition of the Rubaiyat, which is attributed to the Persian poet Omar Khayyam, but was translated or transformed in English by Edward Fitzgerald and illustrated by Vedder. And here's one of the illustrations. Vedder repeated some of these as paintings. Here is a very bright jewel in the Virginia Museum. As a decorative artist, Vedder modeled firebacks to be cast by a prominent Boston firm, Smith and Anthony. We built quite a collection of Smith and Anthony documents at Cabell. Here's their aesthetic 1888 calendar, which is out on the table for you to see. The front says that Smith and Anthony will keep us as warm as these Near Eastern ladies. The back shows the wares with the sun god front and center. The firm's ads made much of the sun god. We know a bit about what this fireback is for. How's the design? There's Millheiser's again. How's the design put together? We see a god, Apollo, surely, still in the maze of classical myth. He may also be one or both the older sun gods who fused with Apollo. The ad more easily shows us how the sun god blazes with hair like fire. Flames and elegantly stylized rays shoot from him. He's a life-giving source, and from his rays, flowers spring. There's a further what's it for here. In a showplace built by a scholarly man, we see decorum in three ways. First, here's a hearth adorned with fiery imagery. Second, in a study, here's Apollo, the god who sponsors learning. And third, in this genteel house, here's a mark of the owner's cultivation. Now, the reception hall, where the great feature is this fireback. It was designed by a popular painter and illustrator, J.W. Eininger, perhaps pronounced Eininger. One of his best known works is his handsome turkey shoot in the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston. Far less well known is his fireback. How's this work put together? Its interest lies chiefly in its source and its quaintness. At center, we see the three witches from Macbeth with their pets. At right, the classical goddess of witches, Hecate, or in Shakespeare's English, Hecate, appears. She scolds the witches for leaving her out of their plans. And at left, she flies off to get something for the brew that will doom Macbeth. Below is Eininger's copyright. This fireback too observes decorum in three ways. First, as a fireplace piece, it shows a fire scene. Second, in a room for receiving guests, here's a different kind of party with Macbeth's hostesses. And third, the well-read Mr. Milheiser quotes Shakespeare at his hearth. VCU's was the only Eininger fireback that we knew of for 30 years till January, when Ray Bonus found one and Louise found another in online sales. So the piece did sell, and people must have appreciated the theme. In fact, an independent but cruder Macbeth fireback was made by two Philadelphia firms, one after the other. There, that's a good look at Double Double and Company. Well, Macbeth, witches, creatures of the night. Wise words. Our last act is more cheerful. We move to academic eclecticism, to the house of the financier Frederick Scott and his wife Elise. This is a room that Chris Novelli has made his own, but we offer a small contribution. We go to Mrs. Scott's bedroom. There. The main theme in the surviving decoration is infants acting like adults. Up high, we see children in a plaster frieze. Below, we see them on pieces of a ceramic called jasperware, invented by Josiah Wedgwood in the 18th century and much copied by other makers. We'll start with one child. Such a figure has many names. The most proper name is his Greek one, Eros, god of love, son of Aphrodite. His name gives us the word erotic, of course. Americans more commonly use his Roman name, Cupid, son of Venus, to give his mother her Roman name. If you're sophisticated, you may call him a puto, Italian for boy, or you can call him amor or capital L love, and there are other names as well. The Virginia Museum lets us track some of the history of Eros. Early classical art treats him as a seductive youth. Overpainting has obscured his wings on this vase. I really don't know what's going on there. Later, The custom arose of showing him not as a youth, but as an infant, and not just as one infant, but as many with or without wings. For centuries, erotes were popular in the arts, acting out adult roles. And here's a nice case in the Virginia Museum, a Roman mosaic where Eros figures portray the four seasons. We have John Dobbins of UVA to thank for our understanding of this mosaic. And here's spring. Christianity took over such imagery for angels called cherubim or cherubim or cherubs. This is quite unlike the original nature of cherubim or cheruvim. We must turn to the Hebrew Bible. We've used the new translation by the great biblical scholar Robert Alter. Here, as elsewhere, we learn that cherubim are the kind of ancient Near Eastern fantastic fauna that we saw last year, that is, beings made up of parts of various creatures. Scholar after scholar has made this point. An online essay by Professor Ehrlich is recent and helpful. Ehrlich is one of the writers who associate cherubim with the transformation of Egyptian sphinxes by Phoenician artists who inspired their Hebrew neighbors. Our concern is Eros or Cupid. As a motif, he appears in many kinds of room. A natural place is bedrooms. Louise and I don't happen to know such rooms in antiquity, but from the Renaissance rebirth of the classical tradition, cases aren't rare. In this story, the early instances can be earthy, and you'll just have to wait for that. By the late 19th century, Eros figures in bedrooms became much less erotic. The Vanderbilts took to the theme. Here's one case, Marble House in Newport. William K. Vanderbilt's 35th birthday gift to his wife, Alva. The front of the house inspired the front of the Scott House. Dr. Kiris has lately studied Alva Vanderbilt's bedroom. The scheme is rich. Cupids are all over the lace. Since this is a ladies' room, female images are another theme. Grand. Love is grand. But 3 years after the house was built, Alva decided that divorce was even better. The Scotts case is different. Langhorne Gibson's candid biography of the Scotts shows from their letters that they had a lasting bond. One suspects that in a room like this, or in this room, I should say, the idea is something like a chamber for a much-loved lady. The activities of the Cupids vary. One plaque has the ever-popular seasons. Spring with a nesting dove. Summer. Fall with the harvest. And poor little winter, he's cold. That cloak is just a symbol of winter wear. And he's defrosting those wee fingers at the brazier. We said that jasperware has been much copied, but this is a known Wedgwood pattern, and original models survive. The Scots plaque was probably bought from the catalog of Wedgwood's New York shop, a place that scholars seem to have forgotten. The room has more Wedgwood cupids, but let's look at the sconces. These may be mock Wedgwood. They're female dancers for a lady's chamber. As to the delightful frieze, we've lately found that these cupids in the garden came right from a catalog that of the Architectural Decorating Company of Chicago, all in accord with decorum for a lady's bedroom. Closing. You know how this lecture was put together? You have the theses in the handout. And you know what today is for, to promote your pleasure in exploring. We particularly hope you'll make your own discoveries about decorum in buildings old and new. But now we must listen to the boys. Stretch break. Yeah. So if you're going to speak, you must say your name. It's too awful when people are sheerly anonymous. I realize that this is my chance to find out what I've forgotten or never learned. In the past, we have sometimes seemed to ignore some people in the Zoom audience. That's been due to the kinks that come with electronic media. But we believe in other years, Ryan or Antonia or Kelly has always helped us catch up with everyone after the event. I might add, with all due respects to the queen of IT, at the age of 81, I console myself that in any afterlife I've ever heard of, there won't be any electronic media. I'm supposed to fill in for a little bit to give callers time, so I will add, I had an older student at VCU who had a Ph.D. in psychology and came back for architectural history. His name was Bill Rhodes. And he observed that using electronic media was like dating a psychotic. Everything is just lovely. And all of a sudden, with apologies, because Ryan keeps us safe. While I'm doing filler, it may amuse you to know audiences have loved the witches in Macbeth. This has been so much the case that various 18th century and 19th century productions increased in the number. The witches were often played for comedy, if you can imagine that, by men in drag, and they sang and danced. In 1794, a London production had a chorus of 50 or 60 singing witches, and I imagine they danced too. Who really needs rock concerts? Well, do we think there may be someone? Well, one or two more things. It may mildly interest you to know that if you'd like a Macbeth fireback, the ones we've seen sell for about $2,000. If you're really eager for one, Louise and I bumped into one in an antique mall on the eastern shore of Maryland at Christmas time. These are the cheaper ones, the ones from Philadelphia, without all the animals. Well, I suppose, since once again, we have succeeded in crushing the spirit of inquiry, we can pass from discussion to the tips. And here we haven't put the examples in the handout. Within 10 days to 2 weeks, VCU puts the presentation on YouTube. As your handout tells you, so you can refresh your memory or you can take notes now. A is shopping. The Thorvaldsen and Wedgwood images keep showing up on modern products. You never know what you may find, for the persistence of the past is all around us. New Wedgwood versions of the Four Seasons are quite available on eBay. Here's a 1970s vase. The price of $19 tells you that the quality isn't tip top. This is called giftware. It's worth having just as a study piece or to hold pencils. And I bought it for both reasons. You can find still cheaper examples on eBay. Thorvaldsen's Night and Day have been much reproduced. You can even get night as a refrigerator magnet. It's a good rule of thumb that reproductions of historic pieces or historic details have a way of not measuring up to the originals. Their value is that the imagery that we've looked at is there for us to find all around us, and that a clumsy copy helps us recognize the superiority of the original. We might add that in the case of the great ceramics firm, Wedgwood is spelled with only one E. When you see someone spelling it with a middle E, that person, particularly if it's an eBayer, is betraying embarrassing ignorance. B is firebacks in historic houses, especially late Victorian houses. It's often dark inside fireplaces, and tour guides may not draw our attention to firebacks. It's worth remembering to take a look and maybe stooping. It's good for those healthy deep knee bends. This is obviously true in any of VCU's houses, any that you can get into these days, or say in a couple of years at Maymont, which is currently closed for restoration of the roof, or the Hyrick House Museum in Washington, or many other places. And here's a tip. Several examples of the sun god are known, and there were derivatives. C is historic bedrooms. You might keep an eye out for Eros or Cupid or his symbols. Familiar works can repay a second look in the flesh or on the internet. Here from early Renaissance Italy is the famous painted room from the Ducal Palace in Mantua, frescoed by the great Andrea Mantegna. We didn't put, and the illusionistic ceiling now, we didn't put this room in the lecture because then we'd have had to wade into the scholarly disputes about the frescoes. We'll just say we've long known the room not under the name Camera Picta, painted chamber, but under the Italian name Chamber of the Newlyweds. And we get the humor. The planter could fall into the room in a flash, and we take it that everyone up top is peeking down at the happy couple, including a whole team of cupids. Some are posed quite rudely, and at least two seem to have got their heads caught in the balustrade as punishment for their voyeurism. There's more to find up there if you look at this on the internet. As we said, the early phases of such decoration can be earthy. D is the Virginia Museum. It's home to many versions of Cupid. The Classical Gallery is an obvious place. You may even spot a second version of Eros portraying the four seasons. Going to an art museum is more effective if you have something to search for rather than just strolling through passively. But don't ignore the other rooms, especially the spectacular Gans collection of silver. You'll find many Cupids there. Here's a dish by Paul de Lamery with another version of the four seasons on the border, and in the details on your left is fall, bringing in the grapes, and on your right, winter with a typically inadequate wrap against the cold wind. We wouldn't have recognized this subject on our own, but we use this outstanding catalog by Joseph Bliss. To get an inexpensive copy, you can use various search engines. Bookfinder is one recommended to us by a former Cabell librarian. If you do a keyword search for Rita Gans collection, you'll bring up modestly priced copies of this catalog and the three sequels by various authors. It pays to do a little reading before going to an art museum. Bliss would help you find the spectacular copy of a famous Canova. Well, that's tips. Next year, we hope, with the help of Ray Bonus and Chris Novelli, to pay tribute to French influence. Our theme is the Lost Chateau of West Franklin Street. Here's one. Want to see what's there now? Are you sure? Promoting historic preservation is another what's it for to this series. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Charles and Louise. And thanks to all of you for joining us on a Saturday in April. If you'd like to enjoy some of our previous lectures in this series, please go to the VCU Libraries YouTube page and Google Artistic Mansions. Also, the link is in the handout. Remember that VCU Libraries is open to everyone, and that includes special collections and archives. So I hope to see you again soon. It's a pretty nice day out there. You might want to get out and enjoy the flowers while they're at their peak. So thanks so much for coming today. Take care. Yeah, there might. Sorry, y'all. This is my first time actually sort of emceeing, and we had a little hiccup with the questions. So if you have questions, please have a seat and I'll come running around with the microphone. But per Charles's request, you do need to say your name before you tell us your question. Ryan's helping me out here.
And I thought I was off the hook.
You have a
You thought you were off the hook. My name is Robin Jones, and I was interested to wonder whether firebacks in other homes in other parts of the country used the same kind of literary, mythological subject matter for decoration.
That is a tall question, because we have studied the firebacks we've studied would only represent from the Mississippi to the East Coast and not not the deep South. So as far as literary subject matter goes, that's a very fair question. It's very observable that heavy things in cast iron tended not to travel very far. For instance, Millheiser's firebacks came from Boston. The other firebacks that we can identify came from Louisville. I suspect that Louisville had a good deal of the southern market, and Smith and Anthony in Boston, their ads seem to indicate that they were really only New England. So there's a question of regionalism. And what happens west of the Mississippi, I really don't know. But that would be something to look for in a place such as California, which had an abundance of Victorian mansions. Robin, you always ask good questions.
Ryan has a question from online.
We do. We got one online question from Anne, and Anne asked, does VCU give tours of the historic buildings on its campus?
Not to the best of my knowledge.
Not to our knowledge either.
Sad to say, about a dozen years ago, the university architect, Mary Cox, applied for a Getty Campus Heritage Grant. Any campus that got this could create a preservation program for their buildings and guided tours of the properties. And we put our shoulders to the wheel. Ray and I collaborated. It seemed a natural because the buildings are historically important. The people who lived in these buildings were the makers of the tobacco industry, the legal profession in Richmond, and so on. And if I may quote from Rogers and Hammerstein, well, now, ain't that too damn bad? So we didn't get the grant, and I believe there are no tours. One of our mentors, Ray Bonus.
I won't have to say my name then. Charles knows this. A lot of the building managers and secretaries and staff who work in these buildings, they're very nice if you come in and ask, hey, do you mind if I looked around? Because most of these firebacks and other niceties in these buildings are on the first floor. So you can, Millheiser House, especially VCU President's House, the Scott Bocock House, buildings like that. Now, some buildings are wiped out. And the best things about the buildings are what's outside. But generally, they might accommodate you. You could even call ahead.
The only hitch is that I've been noticing more and more of those elaborate electronic locks on doors. When I came to VCU, I really was most surprised because I taught at other universities, some you may have heard of. And, that is a giveaway, isn't it? I thought, what's going on here? People are so friendly. And it was everybody. It was faculty and secretaries and librarians. So if you're good at talking your way in, and I wonder, Founders Hall seems to be nearing the end of a several-year-long restoration that's being done, I believe, with real TLC. So there's perhaps a chance of of guided tours when the last of the scaffolding comes down. The plastic is off the building, so it looks as if we're getting there.
Along that line. Thank you. I'm Robin again. I'm curious as to whether you or your students were charged with doing surveys of these buildings and photographing and documenting these aesthetics for posterity and for Ray Bonus's library collection.
I'm still Charles, and no, you said you're still Robin. I charged myself because I looked around at the buildings and thought, this is too good to be true. I was trained, as you know, at Winterthur, and I realized, but in Richmond, we have that kind of riches given the architecture, the museums, and the libraries. So that's the thing about the student papers, that we worked our way through as many buildings as seemed promising. And we didn't get quite all of them. And some of the papers are duds and never made it over across the street. But that was our task. And we have at various times encouraged the administration to notice what a special inheritance we have on these streets and downtown on the MCV campus too.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone. We greatly appreciate you being here today.